Everyone, please join me in welcoming the moderator of our next panel, Robin Hood Managing Director of Narrative Change and National Initiatives, Nisha Patel, and our speakers, founder and CEO of Tipping Point, Danielle Lurie, President and CEO of the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, Rachel Garbo Monroe, and Robin Hood CEO, Wes Moore.
I'm going to let them do the chairs. All right. Good morning, everyone. All right, is your mind blown yet? All right, well, we just heard a fantastic presentation from my good friend and colleague, Raj Chetty. I had the pleasure of working with him and Marta Tienda the last 2 years, and hearing about all of this data, it can be mind-blowing. And what we're here to talk about in this next segment is how do we take all of these data and make them actionable, right? So at Robin Hood, those of you that know us, we are a data-driven organization. We are all about making data, but data coupled with the perspectives of people experiencing poverty, actionable. And so that is why, right now, in this moment, with all of you here in this room, we are thrilled to announce a brand new $25 million initiative that we're calling Mobility Labs. Robin Hood is spearheading this partnership, emphasis on partnership, with the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, with Tipping Point Community, as well as additional support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and from a new anonymous donor to move this work forward. So last year, some of you know, the Gates Foundation made a $5 million investment in Robin Hood because of our 30-year track record and our approach to addressing poverty. We have been able to leverage that initial commitment to put together this powerful partnership. As I mentioned, we are calling the partnership Mobility Labs. That is a very intentional name. Each word in the name is intentional. So LABS is an acronym. If you know me, you know I love meaningful acronyms. So Mobility Labs stands for Mobility, Learning, and Action Bets. Through this 4-year initiative, we are focused on mobility from poverty, the theme of our day. We're focused on providing a springboard up, not just a safety net, but a springboard up to sustainable mobility for families. We are focused on learning, that's the L, learning about short-term predictors of mobility. You've seen from Raj and his colleagues' data, it can be a lifetime journey. We are keen to support action, right? Like research is fantastic, we love it, but we're ready to move to action. And specifically at the community level in very diverse geographies where each of our foundations has deep roots and a long-term commitment. So happy to share with you today the 5 communities where we're gonna focus over the next 4 years, right here in New York City, our home, and in places where we've got wonderful partners, in Baltimore, in rural Northeast Pennsylvania, in suburban Chicago, and in the Bay Area. And while we will make investments that are grounded in data, that are grounded in the perspective of people experiencing poverty, we know this is a new area of work that we're all embarking on together. Mobility is a new lens for many of us, and so we're gonna need to make some bets. So that's the B in Mobility Labs, right? We're gonna need make some bets in order to learn. But we will mitigate the risk, like you do with any good bet, right? By working with fantastic partners, national and local, partners who bring strong track records and significant expertise in their communities. And our hope is that the learning from these investments will inform and influence not just Robin Hood and our partners' work, but the work of many others around the country, which is why we've chosen such diverse communities. So I am now excited to moderate a conversation among 3 of the dynamic and diverse leaders who are backing this effort. My boss, Wes Moore, Rachel Garbo Monroe, President and CEO of the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, and Danielle Lurie, the CEO and founder of Tipping Point Community. I also want to acknowledge that Sue Desmond-Hellman, the CEO of the Gates Foundation, wanted to join us, but due to a conflict back in Seattle, she wasn't able to, but she sends her regards. So Wes, I'm going to start with you. And I'm actually going to ask you to respond to a question that a few people have asked me today, like, what, really? Robin Hood is partnering on efforts that go beyond New York City? Why the heck would we do that?
And first, Nisha, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your energy and for your vision around this work. And to have a chance to partner with not just friends like both Rachel and Daniel. And Daniel, by the way, today's his birthday. So I love the fact that he's spending his birthday hanging out here in New York, across the country. But this is a really important evolution. And part of it is because, Robinhood is very proud to be New York born, New York bred, and New York focused, and always will be. But we also understand that poverty is not a New York issue. And so as we're going through this process and really thinking about sustainably moving families out of poverty, we know that the solutions might not be within the 5 boroughs. We know that the things that we want to think about and understand and learn might not be here, and we want to be able to take the things that are working here and be able to share them. So if there are things that are happening in Pittsburgh, in the Bay Area, it was an area in the Bay Area, not Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh in California. If there are things that are working in Northeast Pennsylvania and Baltimore, we want to know about it and why it's working and what the lessons learned are. And when there are things that are working in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx and Manhattan and Staten Island, we want to be able to openly share that data and share that information as well. And so when we say we move in partnership, and the reason that we're so excited about this is because this is just a core prime example of what we mean by moving in partnership to be able to truly penetrate and puncture a really hard problem that all of us in our different geographies are still very much wrestling with.
So I want to go to you, Rachel, next. I mentioned at the opening that each of our foundations has long-standing commitments to these 5 communities, and we're deeply rooted in these 5 communities where Mobility Labs will focus. In the case of the Weinberg Foundation, you actually have roots in all 5 of the communities. You've got a history, a long-term commitment there. So I'm wondering if you could share with us what you see as similar, because they're pretty different communities, and what you see as different in terms of the opportunities and needs that you expect that we'll see in these communities.
Thank you, and thank you for your leadership and for joining this work and for your leadership. New York City can claim Wes, but Baltimore claims him more than New York City. So we can have that fight. And I don't know, but a quick question without a halo effect, how many in this room until today, or the promotional materials for today, have never heard of the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation? Don't be shy. So that's good, not as many as I would think. So we are a Baltimore-based foundation. We have $2.6 billion in assets. We will distribute $125 million in grants this year, almost entirely in the United States and almost entirely in 8 communities, trying to really focus on geography, either where we have long-term relationships through Harry Weinberg's work and legacy, or we have trustees where they are living and can provide leadership. So in Northeast Pennsylvania, Rob Kelly, our chair and trustee who is here today, has led the work there for many, many years, and we understand how to convene that community and what the challenges are there. We have Paula Pretlow here from the Bay Area, Gordon Berlin here from the New York area, and on live streaming, Ambassador Faye Hartog-Levin from Chicago, representing those other geographies. Some of them are newer to Weinberg in terms of local leadership on the ground, but not new in terms of funding. But what we also see is, while some of the issues might be the same issues across geographies, jobs, or specifically transportation and commuting to get to those jobs, the ability to execute on those, the level of quality and quantity of nonprofits that provide those services are vastly different. So the interventions on a global sense may be similar, but on a tactical sense might be very different. And we will do our best to bring partners we've worked with for dozens of years together to try to help make an effective difference.
And we just could not be more excited. So Daniel, I want to go to you next. So when you and I first spoke last summer about this, when Mobility Labs was really just a concept on paper, Daniel shared who he founded Tipping Point. He shared with me, you founded Tipping Point now, it's been 14 years, and you said for 14 years, there's been talk of partnering with Robinhood. So why now? What made this opportunity so compelling? Why did you give it such serious consideration and ultimately say, yes, we want to go in and we want to be in this partnership?
I took a walk yesterday morning. I went to 111 Broadway, and those were our offices at Robinhood days before September 11th, and September 11th was my 4th day of work at Robinhood. And I was down there that morning. And from that moment, I was a New Yorker. Even though I'm born and raised in San Francisco, I became a New Yorker. But I also fell in love with Robinhood. And I went to David and Paul and others, and I said, we need to do this outside of New York. And I was so inspired by what Robinhood was about back then that I had to go back home and start something similar. So Robinhood's always been a place that holds something close to my heart. I met my wife at Robinhood, and you guys do it really well. And so Wes is someone that when he called and you called, Nisha, I said, we got to do this. This is in line with everything that we try to do at Tipping Point, which is tackling poverty in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have been doing it for 14 years. We've raised $250 million, and we still have 1.3 million people who are too poor to meet their basic needs. You need five minimum wage jobs to make ends meet in the San Francisco Bay Area. Sitting here watching Raj talk, I mean, come on, like, this is going to be something that we have to do. We've always been about data. We've always been about taking risk. And after seeing him talk, the data's there, and I don't even know how big of a risk this is. I mean, maybe we should be taking more risk, to be honest. But it's an honor to be on stage with you all and to be in this work with everybody up here.
Thank you, Daniel. So building on what Daniel was saying, about the data and building on everything we heard from Raj, Wes, I'm going to come back to you. We at Robinhood, we talk about mobility labs, but really all of our work under your leadership as being data-driven and heart-led. And I would say those are equally important to us. But can you share with everyone in the room and everyone listening online, what do we mean by that and why both of those elements will be so important to actually sustainably help lift families out of poverty?
It's, we find the idea of being data-driven and heart-led to be incredibly important because the data is going to matter. The data will help to add context. The data will help to demonstrate momentum, which things are working, which things are not. But we also know that data provides context, but it's actually the people who are closest to the ground that are actually going to provide the real momentum and the real push to actually change things. I remember I was asked to leave a school when I was 13 years old. We made a mutual decision this wasn't a good idea for anyone. And so when I was kicked out of this school, I remember I was invited back. When I was kicked out, I was actually invited back a couple years ago to be their graduation speaker, which I found hilarious.
Did you do it?
I did. And they gave me an honorary degree, which I thought was even more hilarious. But when I went back, the guy who's the dean now, who I've become close to, asked me a question. He said, what could we have done to help you in your experience when it did not go well? And my answer to him was, I wish you would have actually spoken with me instead of just about me. Because if you would have actually spoken with me, I would have actually told you what was going on. And when we think about the importance of this work, there cannot be a decision that has any real market chance of working if we're just doing it in isolation without actually involving community members involved in it. We say the people who are closest to the challenge are going to be the ones who are closest to the solution. And we think about it, Robinhood, with Blue Ridge Labs, which is really our technology incubator that we have in Brooklyn. There's a core part of Blue Ridge Labs, and you'll hear a part of it later on today, called the Design Insight Group. What the Design Insight Group, it's 1,100 New Yorkers who are currently living in poverty and on this pathway to mobility. Every decision that's made, every technology that's built or invested in is done with their insight, with their involvement, and done in partnership with the Design Insight Group. And so we find that to be a really core and important part of this work, that we are never going to get to the solutions that we need to get to by doing it in isolation or having conversations about communities. The conversations need to be very much with communities, because if we can do that and if we can do a good job of listening, we're probably going to do a better job of getting to the answers that we're all searching for.
So I want to go to a question now for everyone on the panel. So another aspect of Mobility Labs, beyond looking at the data, supporting community engagement, ultimately supporting what might be direct service programming, is to begin to invest in ideas to change the narrative, to change the narrative around how we talk about poverty and people experiencing poverty in the United States, and in particular in the 5 communities where we'll focus. So this afternoon, you're going to hear from an amazing friend and colleague of mine, Jennifer Eberhardt, who also worked with Marta, Raj, and I on the U.S. Partnership, about research on biases that undergird inaccurate narratives. And you're also going to hear from some creative voices who are helping to move forward strategies to shift narrative. So there's a lot of buzz for those of you who work in philanthropy. This is the hot topic right now. And I often say about this, like what Mark Twain is quoted as saying about the weather. Everyone talks about it, but no one does anything about it. So we want to actually try and do something about it. And we're fortunate to be able to take some calculated risks, as Daniel was saying. Maybe we should take some more risks. So this is one. So I'd love to hear from each of you. I'm going to start with Rachel. What are you most hopeful, either about mobility or about narrative work over the next 4 years, most hopeful that we'll learn as we go into this together?
So I think we're all very hopeful about this, in part because this is some level of risk-taking, different for each of the organizations, perhaps as you change and go outside of your zone and others give substantial money into a partnership platform. For me, I think about the man or the woman I will meet through this program, because I believe, and Weinberg believes, in a very person-centered approach, whether these are grants for adults with disabilities or for veterans or for low-income older adults. We want the individual at the center of the conversation of what their needs are. And that person is going to say to us, you're spending $25 million in the next 4 years. What are you going to have to show for it, and how is my life going to change? And we need to be able to answer that question. We look at grants both, or not even both, as sort of an art and a science if it's done well, and we don't underestimate either of those agendas. They need to be in concert together. And if philanthropy is effective, we wrap a warm quilt around the community that we're trying to support, and different entities have different pieces of that quilt. But what's powerful for me about this is all of the funders coming forward and saying we're going to take the risk and do this. Our DNA is on this piece of the quilt together. So we're very much aligned, and for us that is exciting, but for us the narrative has to be driven by the men and women we're going to meet who are going to say, show us what you did with that money.
Yeah, I love this partnership. Daniel.
There are so many myths out there. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You'll make it if you work hard. That data just blows that out of the water. You can work as hard as you want, but if it takes you 5 minimum wage jobs, it's still not happening for you. We have a lot of myths going on around homelessness in San Francisco. We launched a $100 million effort to cut chronic homelessness in half a couple years ago over a 5-year period. And through this, we've studied the data, and 70% of people that become homeless in San Francisco are from San Francisco. And yet everyone in San Francisco and everyone in the Bay Area thinks we're a magnet for homelessness. But if you go and you talk to mayors of Seattle and San Diego and Los Angeles, they'll say, we're a magnet for homelessness. So what we need to do is we really need to dig into the data. We need to show people, and then we need to tell these stories. And I think what Robin Hood does well, and what we learned at Tipping Point, we tell really good stories. So you can't just show people data. You also have to have the stories and the people, as Wes said. So I think we need to shatter these myths because they're holding us back, and I think that's part of this partnership.
Yeah, and Wes, I always tell people, I'm at Robin Hood because of our mission, but I'm here to work on narrative because Wes is one of the people I have met in my career who is most masterful at taking personal narrative and making that pivot to the structural and policy change that needs to happen. So how are we going to do that together, Wes?
Thank you, and I really appreciate it. And I think that part of what we have to do is also get rid of the myth that philanthropy or any of us in this room can somehow fix this. These structures matter, and these policies matter. You know, if you just take one issue, for example, take criminal justice as just one example, right? And so you can fund the best job training program that you want. And we do. Robin Hood funds some fantastic job training programs, particularly for people who are returning home. And so, but if a person is returning home, which by the way represents 95% of people who are incarcerated, right? For people returning home, if you come home and the answer is, well, welcome home, but remember that you can't live in public housing, even if your family's there. And so welcome home, but remember that you can't apply for federal and state jobs. welcome home, but remember that you can apply for a job, but you have to check a box. Or you can apply for college, but you have to check a box, knowing that 75% of people that have to check boxes will not complete the application because psychologically they've just been eliminated from the process. And even if you get accepted to college, congratulations, but you can't apply for Pell Grants. These are structures. And so I think the other myth that I think we want to dispel with this is the fact that any of us can do this on our own. Is that part of the work means how are we actually addressing and highlighting the fact that there are still systemic and structural issues that have got to work right alongside the individual bets that we're making to actually create the long-term systemic and structural impacts that we're all hoping for.
So last question. I'm gonna also open this up to the whole panel, and I think we'll start with Daniel, go to Wes, and we'll give Rachel the last word, which is, so we're kicking off a day here. We're in the morning. We've got a whole day to dig into these issues. So what's one question? I've asked you all a lot of questions, but one question you would encourage our audience in the room and the viewing audience out there online to consider, both throughout the day, but after everyone leaves, they get onto trains, planes, automobiles, about mobility, about narrative that we maybe don't know the answer to. What's one thing that we should dig into? So start with you, Daniel.
Well, I think the interesting thing that Raj also talked about is place, and how much does place matter. And so as we go into this, just even in the San Francisco Bay Area, Wes brought up this part of the region called Pittsburgh. We're going to look at South San Jose. We're going to look at Bayview, Hunters Point. What works in one of those neighborhoods may not work in other parts of even the Bay. So then the question is in South Chicago, is there similarities between Bayview and South Chicago, or the South Side, sorry. And so that, to me, is something that I would encourage you all. I was talking with Eric from The Door before, and his model is so incredibly effective here in New York City, and could it work elsewhere? And so those are the questions I think we should be asking each other.
Wes?
I think from our perspective, I am so proud of Robinhood for continuing to push outside of boundaries to say, what else can we do, who else can we partner with, and how do we go about creating these strong partnerships to be able to create solutions. And I think for all of our organizations, I think Rachel hit it exactly right. For all of our organizations, we're treading into new waters, and that's okay. And that's important, and that's powerful, and that's necessary. And so I think the question that I would hope that all of us can ask today is, how do we tread into uncomfortable spaces? Using data, using the things that have made us strong in our past and our history, but how are we willing to actually tread into those places that we might not have gone before, but we're doing it with a fundamental understanding that even if it's a little bit riskier, if it works, this is something that can change the way we do our work. And that's something I think that we're all really excited about, and the question I'm hoping people will ask.
Rachel, you get to have the last word, so let's make it powerful.
I would say that many of us in the room are in jobs or roles where in one way or another we are trying to serve people in poverty. And if we succeed, we are going to completely change that narrative in our head to how we help people really get out of and stay out of poverty. And if we're a reporter, or we're in the media, or we're doing a job and want to write that report 5 years from now or 10 years from now, what is the story we're going to tell? We're each going to say what we did to get that to change. And if each of us take on a piece of that and change it, we actually could be in a different place. That would be my hope.
I can't wait to come back in 4 years and share with everyone the answer to some of those questions. So please join me in thanking the wonderful leaders on this panel.